Hey everybody, this is JDGaming, back today with a hero deck profile I'm pretty sure is the likes of which you've never seen before. This thing I call Chaos Kaiju Invoked Mekk Hero, and yeah, I know that sounds crazy, but very quickly, the backstory with this is I have loved heroes ever since I played them back in elementary school, and they've always been a part of my dueling experience in some capacity or another. I know Stratos is still banned, we had Rampart Blaster get a text change out of nowhere with Legendary Collection GX, yada yada, but I've always revisited them from time to time, and when I saw the Invoked monsters and Fusion Enforcers, I knew I wanted to make some hybrid build, and very conveniently, it just so happens that we ended up getting the Mekk-Knight Link monster in Cybernetic Horizon, and we have the Aleister, the Invoker of Maddness, I believe it's called, Link monster coming up in Friday's Shadows in Valhalla. So all of a sudden, we're able to combine these strategies together into this explosive going second OTK build of heroes, and if you end up failing to kill your opponent, you just have the hero and the invoked section of your deck that you can sit on past your opponent once they've lost a lot of resources, and then they're probably screwed because they won't have the resources necessary to fight you back through your oppressive counter quick effect type of monsters. So that's the crazy type of strategy this is, but I know it's a new thing, so I'm gonna go ahead and explain everything. This is gonna be a let's build as always, so all my reasoning will be present. If you just want to see the list and try to decipher it, the table of contents is in the description as always, so you can click the timestamp and take yourself to the end of the video where I go through the list. And if you have any questions remaining after that, feel free to check out the middle portion of the video where hopefully I've done this decent job, explaining what the heck this deck is supposed to do. So without further ado, let's build Chaos Kaiju Invoked Mekk Hero. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build the core, and here in this crazy combination deck, we had to consider what is the best normal summon we can bring to the table, and for this, it ended up becoming a no-brainer with Aleister the Invoker. This guy is of course a spellcaster, it's a dark, and those traits are pretty important for all the different plays you're making, so just keep them in mind if you've never seen this guy before. When he's normal summoned or flip face up, he lets you add an Invocation spell card, which we'll get to in just a moment, from your deck to your hand, which is pretty darn awesome. On top of that, he serves as a hand trap, allowing you to, as a quick effect, boost one of your fusion monsters' attack and defense points by 1,000 until the end of the turn, which goes nicely with not only the invoked fusion monsters, but also the heroes and anything else you happen to be playing in this strategy. So this is our main guy. He gets you our fusion spell, so we want to have 3 copies of him to open with him, and on top of that, we play 3 copies of the spell Magical Meltdown. This field spell is awesome because when you activate it, it rotas you for an Aleister, and on top of that, while it's face up on the field, your opponent cannot interrupt your fusion summons or respond to them, which is just nuts. You are restricted to only playing 1 of these cards per turn, which is important to note because we do play another field spell going down through the list, so just keep that in mind if you're playing with this deck. But overall, this thing is a 3 of in this strategy to ensure we get Aleister, and of course, just being able to negate your opponent's options, or I guess restrict your opponent's negations of your fusion spells, is pretty darn nice as a bonus as well. And then to make sure we get that, yeah, we're going in completely balls to the walls here, terraforming at 3. Add a field directly from your deck to your hand is awesome with Magical Meltdown, but it also goes and combos nicely with the Fusion Gate that we're going to tech in for the hero portion, which just ties everything together quite nicely. So 3 copies of that, giving us essentially 9 copies of Aleister the Invoker. And then I run just 2 copies of Invocation. This is something that you could play around with 3 copies, mainly because I do have Pot of Desires in this strategy, and every so often I do wish I had a 3rd copy, but overall, Invocation is just self-sufficient. It's a polymerization essentially for any monster if you're using materials only from your hand, so not from your field. Or alternatively, if you're going for an invoked fusion monster, which requires Aleister the Invoker and then some other attribute of monster, much like the Omni Elemental Heroes, then you're able to use monsters on your side of the field or either graveyard, which is nuts because now you can use your opponent's hand traps, whatever else they may have used in their play going first. Lots of different things are now valuable resources for you, and you're able to banish them so your opponent can't have access to those cards as well. And as if that weren't enough, when you banish your Aleister the Invoker this way, you set it up for its ability where now you can return the Invocation from your graveyard back to your deck and shuffle it, and then you add the banished Aleister to your hand, where you can then normal summon it next turn or use it as the hand trap for the attack boost, whatever. And so that recycling component is really awesome, making it so you only really need 2 copies of this. Maybe 3 with Desires again, but I think 2 ends up working quite nicely overall. The next major component of our deck is the Elemental Heroes, and so to start off, I like playing 2 copies of Shadow Mist, mainly because it's very searchable and you have once per turn hard effects anyway on this card. So if it's sent to the graveyard, maybe from Invocation or whatever, you're able to go and search another hero, which keeps your plays coming. On top of that, if you special summon it, you can add a mass change to your hand, which is very important when we combine it with a hero lives. So we play 3 copies of this card because we want to see this card every game if possible. Yeah, you pay half your life points and it sucks to get Ash Blossomed. That just means, make sure you have access to Called by the Grave if you have, that type of an issue going on. But essentially, this instantly kicks out your Shadow Mist or any other level 4 or lower Elemental Hero monster, and in the case of Shadow Mist, that gets you the mass change, so not only can you go for a Dark Law play if you're going first, but you can use it as a nice battle trick during the battle phase to go and do more damage to your opponent. You can go and use it to access Elemental Hero, or rather Masked Hero Acid, to wipe your opponent's back row off of your Elemental Hero 𝗪𝗇𝒄, which of course is the classic combo that just nukes your opponent's entire board and is excellent for a going second strategy like this. So definitely love 3 copies of a Hero Lives just because it's the one we want to draw. Then 2 copies of Mass Change, just 2 copies just so that if you happen to draw one, you still have access to a search and you're not losing cards for no reason that you could have access to. But realistically, you're only going to play one of these things unless you have multiple different attributes of heroes, because due to the space in the extra deck, I only have one of each attribute that I wanted to have access to. Then we have 3 copies of Emergency Call. This just lets you go and rota for whatever elemental hero you would like of any level and of any type. And that's the main reason I don't play the actual reinforcement of the army in this strategy. It's because we're going to play a few different hero monsters that don't fit the bill quite like we can with Emergency Call. So this is basically 3 more blanks, so we can go and add our Shadow Mist, or we can add Elemental Hero Honest Neos. This thing basically pumps up your hero monster for an entire turn cycle, so your turn and your opponent's turn, by its 2500 attack, which is crazy on like a Dark Law. Now it's 4900 attack, your opponent can't take it out of battle, and it has an annoying ability, so it's hard to take out in general. You could use this on any other things as well that have, abilities or what else, you just do more damage with it. There's a lot of cool things you can do with this, and it's easily a free card that you can search off of the Shadow Mist or off of E-Call. Then we also play 1 copy of Elemental Hero Ice Edge, which is basically a water monster, so you go for your Masked Hero Acid or your Elemental Hero 𝗪𝗇𝒄 off of this card. He does have an ability that lets you discard a card, maybe Shadow Mist or something, in order to go and attack your opponent directly that turn, and if you do damage by a direct attack, you kill a spell or trap. So it's not the worst card in the world in that regard. It's kind of funny when you're able to combine these guys and do over 3000 damage off of like a weakling and then like a big buff in the form of Honest Neo. So that's kind of like a little bonus trick that you have. I think it's better than Bubble Man in this strategy because you don't necessarily empty your hand all the time with all of the potential bricks. I say bricks in kind of like a lightweight. Like, you basically want to drop your hand as much as possible, but the Elemental Hero Bubble Man wouldn't be useful until the rest of your hand is gone, whereas Ice Edge is just generically useful in this strategy. You're not going for link spams or for, Xyz summons in this strategy, so Ice Edge works nicely over Bubble Man in this case. And then Voltic is a nice one of light monster as well, not only giving you access to the Shining and Master Koga, but also having the ability where if you have your banished, let's say your Elemental Hero Shadow Mist, you could special summon that back when you go and damage your opponent through, I think it's just any battle damage, so you can actually combine that with Honest Neos as well. And those cards work quite nicely with these 2 here as just one-ofs. Miracle Fusion is kind of like a Blackluster Soldier in that it gets rid of 2 of your monsters from your field or graveyard, and that's why I only play the 1 copy. You don't really want to draw multiples in this strategy just because then you run the risk of not having any fodder for your Chaos plays or for any of your other plays. So just the 1 to easily have access to your main hero monsters. And then the Fusion Gate is awesome because we have the 3 copies of Terraforming, you can go into this as an alternative when you already have access to Aleister, and now Fusion Gate lets you go and fusion summon for an 𝗪𝗇𝒄, then immediately turn that into something else, and that will blow up your opponent's entire board. So lots of power comes out from Fusion Gate, and then, that combos nicely with, I banished my Shadow Mist, so I can summon that back with Voltic or whatever. Lots of little cute plays you could do with this, so I definitely like the variety it brings to the deck. It adds another layer of dimension for just 1 card. Charging full speed ahead to the end of this deck profile already, we're going to go through the remaining archetypes that kind of serve as bonuses in this deck. So we're going to start off with 3 copies of BLS. Since you're playing mainly lights and darks anyway, and Invocation conveniently sends them to the graveyard, it's very easy to drop 1 copy, sometimes even 2 copies of this card. So you just play 3 of this so that you're able to push through your opponent's board even more easily and just do whopping, damage and just win the game. So that's the whole point point of this card. And of course, it has that bonus ability to, you know, interact with your other cards and just get rid of your opponent's field of monsters that are annoying. So that's that. Then for Kaijus, I like playing these three here, basically the same attributes that we play for our heroes. So it's water, so we can still go for fusions, you know, dark and light. And on top of these, I like playing one copy of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. You can always side more copies of Kaijus, but I just went with these particular ones because it enables my plays. And then you're with the 3 copies to 1 Interrupted Slumber, you're probably going to have the ability to resolve this card. Most games you draw it anyway, and you know, you could still set up crazy battle scenarios where you have 3300 attack 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗓 over the Gamma Seal. The only reason I chose 𝗖𝗎𝗓𝗓 over the Thunder Strike is literally because I'm building Cyber Dragons right now, so I have this guy as a machine. You can easily play Thunder King, the Lightning Strike Kaiju, and that works as well. It's essentially the same thing because he's a light monster and you don't care so much about the typing. So that is that engine here. Just helps soften your opponent's field so you're able to take it out more easily, and gives you something to kill with your BLS, which is nice as a bonus. And then for Mekk-Knight monsters, I just play 3 copies of the main Searcher, Blue Sky, as well as 2 copies of Purple Nightfall. So if you've never seen these guys before, I know I hadn't been using them on my channel, but essentially they're all light psychic, charging full steam ahead to the end of the profile with the remaining archetypes that are just in here for tech. We have Blackluster Soldier at 3. This is the Chaos component. Essentially, since we're playing lights and darks, and you can easily send them to the graveyard with Invocation, you know, claim the abilities of Shadow Mist, use the ability of Honest Neos, things like that. It's very easy to accumulate the materials necessary to summon 1, maybe even 2 of these guys if you draw them, and then they just help kill your opponent as soon as possible. Plus, it's just a really flexible card that happens to interact with all the other little things we talked about, like Voltic and whatnot. So fun little tech card there. And then on top of that, we do play the Kaiju engine to help get rid of our opponent's field of annoying monsters. These specifically because it's a water, dark, and a light monster, so you're able to use them for your own fusion plays for the elemental heroes. And then a Kaiju Slumber just because, you know, that helps even out the board, and it still leaves monsters there so that you can go and attack on them with your BLS for the extra attack, or use Mekk-Knights with them. So that's really why. You could use Raigeki as well if you really wanted, but I ended up choosing just this because this is the main thing I had room for, and I feel like this adds a nice little consistent engine to get rid of your opponent's plays that they have started off with. And then the last component of this deck is the Mekk-Knight engine. So this is something I haven't used on my channel before, so I'll give a quick primer on them. Essentially, the Mekk-Knights are all light psychic monsters. So at the bottom we have Purple Nightfall, and at the top we have Blue Sky, and they all have a special summoning requirement where if you have 2 cards in the same column in the entire row of 4 or 5 in the extra monster zones case, right? You're able to drop it to that column, and then they each have an ability. So Mekk-Knight Blue Sky says if your opponent had 1 or more cards in that column, you get to add different Mekk-Knight monsters that aren't Blue Sky, so copies of Purple Nightfall, from your deck to your hand up to the number of cards they had. So, you know, if they have their extra monster zone filled, let's say, you can set your own back row, which we have plenty of spells that we can set, summon this guy, search your Nightfall, and then, you know, resolve your spell later if you'd like. Or in the case of your opponent playing some back row, or maybe a monster under that link monster, you can go ahead and drop Blue Sky anyway, and then potentially search another guy. You could consider playing more guys, but realistically, this guy's already got 2,000 attack, and this guy's got 2,500. Indigo Eclipse is okay, but it was kind of awkward trying to utilize him to actually move guys around, so I didn't really find it particularly useful. Nightfall has the same summoning conditions, but on top of that, it lets you go and take a Mekk-Knight monster on your side of the field, and as a quick effect, banish it until the next turn, and if you banish it, you get to add a non-purple Nightfall monster from your deck to your hand. So basically, you'd be able to go and search Blue Sky using the Purple Nightfall, albeit by slowing yourself down for a turn. So it's something to know you have access to if the game's going to go longer and you're not going to kill him. But realistically, you're using this guy as a free 2,500 beater and that as a free 2K beater. They're light psychics, so that's interesting in that it's a different type from your dark spellcaster Aleister for the link monsters that we'll go through in just a moment. And then the last 2 cards of the deck are 2 Pot of Desires, mainly because once you have the specific pieces in your hand and you know what you're going to do with them, like let's say you draw an Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, you know then and there if you're going to resolve it that game or not, depending on what your opponent has and, you know, if you need to set it up, right? So you basically activate Desires once you have all the key things you wanted searched out from your deck, and then you just get 2 more cards, which lets you go and fight your opponent full force and hopefully kill them. This thing has added a lot of consistency in terms of just beating down your opponent, because those extra cards help you in that goal. So don't worry so much about the longevity of your deck. All the things necessary are at 2 or 3 just for that reason, and the tech pieces you can usually search out using like e-call or a hero lives or whatever, so it's not ever really an issue. So that's the 40 card main deck. And then to talk briefly about the extra deck here, we have first some link monsters. So these 3 are the ones I like to use. Underclock Taker is basically in here because it's a quick link 2 that you can make off of just effect monsters, and it does have nice arrows no matter where he's placed, so that's pretty cool. And he does have the ability that lets you go and weaken your opponent's monsters by the strength of your own, which is nice in tandem with like BLS or some of your other OTK monsters. So this just helps you enable OTKs, and so I like it for that. Then we have these 2 guys here. So Mekk-Knight of the Morningstar is kind of interesting. It has a lot more potential in other strategies, not so much this, but essentially you just need 2 monsters, including at least 1 Mekk-Knight monster. It's got 2,000 attack, so the way I see it is you summon Blue Sky, which is 2,000 attack, and then you add your Purple Nightfall to your hand. You go and summon a different monster, preferably not your Purple Nightfall, maybe it's the Aleister you had from before, and you go and turn it into this guy. So yeah, you lost 1,000 attack points from your other monster, your Aleister or whatever else you may have used, but now you have 2 arrows, so if you have Fusion Gate out or Invocation set up, you can go and fuse multiple times and bring out a bigger board thanks to the opening that this creates. It does have a cool ability that lets you pitch extra Mekk-Knight cards to add a World Legacy card from your deck to your hand, and that does mean, remember, you can add World Legacy, World Legacy Succession, that spell card that's essentially Monster Reborn, to this deck if you'd like. But I found I don't always go for a link monster. I usually go for just spam the board, but usually that includes a fusion monster and a BLS, sometimes a link monster, not always, and so I didn't want to have the dead Monster Reborn-esque card floating around if I can't access it every game. So definitely potential for this card, but not for this strategy. Mainly you just want to open zones up, and you don't really lose attack in the process because you can just go and fusion summon multiple guys. Aleister, the Invoker of Maddness, is the new link monster with 1800 attack. It needs 2 monsters with different types and attributes, and that's why it's important that you know, oh, Aleister's a dark spellcaster, but now I can use any Mekk-Knight with it. I can use, you know, Shadow Mist, or maybe even the Ice Edge alongside a Mekk-Knight for this. So like, know what different combinations you have to make this. It's fairly easy to do so, but you know, just don't get tripped up by the requirement. And it has 3 interesting abilities. So the first one is that it becomes Aleister the Invoker on the field or graveyard, which has a nice bit of implication for allowing you to make your fusion summons. And it was more important in OCG where things are limited and more restricted than here in the TCG, but it's something that does come up every once in a while. You can use this guy as your Aleister the Invoker, and that comes in handy with the second effect, which says if you fusion summon, or I guess if a fusion monster is fusion summoned anywhere, either side of the field, you can go ahead and discard a card from your hand to add an Invocation from your deck to your hand, and now, oh, I have an Aleister, I have an Invocation, I can go and make a fusion if I would like to, if you're not using the Invocation for some other hero fusion or something along those lines. Then the last effect is, it's like a bonus thing for other types of invoked decks, I suppose. When this thing leaves the field because of your opponent's card, you can go and add a copy of the trap card Omega Summon to your hand, but realistically that card's a bit too slow even if you're searching it out, so I ended up not playing any copies of it at all. So 2 arrows, which is awesome, access to Invocation potentially constantly, and it itself is an Aleister that's easy to bring out, so very powerful card. I didn't think this was going to be useful for this strategy, to be completely honest, when I first tested the deck, and then I realized, wait, this thing is just really, really good in enabling more consistent plays, and so definitely would recommend this thing when it comes out Friday. Do give it a shot. Then for our hero monsters, we have 2 copies of Absolute Zero. The reason we have 2 is because you make this thing first out of Ice Edge or whatever, and then if you have Fusion Gate or something, you fuse that directly into this other copy, because he just needs a hero monster and a water monster, so you could go and immediately wipe your opponent's board clean by having the second copy. So I definitely love this second copy of that. Then 1 copy each of the dark and light monsters. So 𝗪𝗠𝗪𝗏 gains attack points, 100 for every hero in your graveyard, and it requires a dark monster plus an elemental hero to summon. And then Shining needs an elemental hero plus a light monster, and he actually gains attack based on the monsters, the hero monsters that are banished, which, you know, sometimes does happen if you go with Fusion Gate or whatever. If nothing else, he's a pretty solid 26 beater, and he gets stronger pretty quickly because 300 points is what he gets for every monster that is banished. And then he does have this bonus ability where if he's sent for, or when he's sent from the field to the graveyard, he can recover himself or any of 2 of your banished elemental hero monsters to your hand. But the problem is, this is such an old card. It misses timing and everything if your opponent does something where it's not the last thing to happen that this card was removed, and basically it's rarely ever going to leave the field, or I guess be sent to the graveyard where its effect triggers. Realize it does exist because I guess it could come up if it dies in battle or something, but realistically, these guys are just in here so you can make big monsters and push for game more easily. And then to parallel that, we play the different attributes of the masked heroes in order to go and take use of Mask Change as an additional attack. So Masked Hero Acid lets you go and turn your Absolute Zero into a card that destroys all your opponent's back row and weakens the remaining monsters by 300 if they happen to have any. So that's a pretty nice way to just get rid of your opponent's field. Dark Law, of course, lets you hinder your opponent's grave and their hand, including hand traps, which is just an awesome card if you're forced to go first for whatever reason. And then Koga is nice just because it does have the ability to weaken your opponent's monster, which kind of works like a BLS, or not a BLS, but an Underclock Taker, and that combos nicely with cards like BLS. Mainly this card's literally in here just because, you know, it's just an extra attacker, but sometimes it does put in the extra work necessary for an OTK, and of course these two are just all-star monsters that are worth playing in general for hero strategies. Then we have the invoked monsters as our last few, so we just play 5. So first I like playing Water Invoked 𝗖𝗍𝗪𝗧, then 2 copies of Invoked Mekk-Knight. Basically 𝗖𝗍𝗪𝗧 is in defense position, or usually you summon it in defense with its 2800 defense, and then it gets to attack while in defense position with its 1800 attack, so kind of like Rampart Blaster or whatever. The reason you want to summon this guy is because he just takes a water monster, which is fairly easy to do, and he can't be destroyed by or targeted by your opponent's card effects, which means he's a pain in the butt to get rid of. 2900 defense and immunity is quite sick, and then, you know, he's still able to attack while in defense position as just an added bonus. The Mekk-Knight is, of course, something everyone's really excited about. It's finally coming out as a super in the reprint set Shadows in Valhalla. So basically what this thing does is it lets you go and ultimate providence your opponent's card. So once per turn, per copy, I believe, you're able to go and discard a card that matches the type of card your opponent just played. So spell, trap, or monster, you just negate that card and destroy it, which is a huge pain in the butt to get over, especially when you combine it with something like your Dark Law. So very annoying card, very easy to summon because all it needs is a light monster, potentially from your opponent's graveyard or your own graveyard. So you have 2 copies because this thing is what you go for a lot of the time, especially if the game lasts more than 1 turn. So that's why we play that. And then kind of 2 more tech ones. So Invoked 𝗪𝗓𝗄𝗃 is awesome in that it just needs a fire monster. So that's Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Everyone's playing that thing, so you're able to go and take advantage of that. And then it gains 200 attack for every one of your opponent's monsters, or every one of your opponent's cards, excuse me. So it starts off with 2300, then quickly grows, and then it's able to attack all your opponent's monsters once each and does piercing through your opponent's defenses. So this thing's basically able to do a massive amount of damage, clear your opponent's board, and then you push with your other cards alongside it for game. So that's why this guy's in here. He just punishes Ash Blossom. Whew, don't want to say that. And then Invoked Elysium is kind of nuts in some ways and kind of not so awesome in some ways. So you need an invoked monster. Oh, so that lets me use fusions and stuff that are in the grave too, right? Yes. And then he needs a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck. And that I only recently found out, unfortunately, is a monster that's still on the field that was special summoned from the extra deck, because apparently they like forget where they came from when they end up falling into the graveyard. So usually what ends up happening is you use your own monster with it, or I guess if you took your opponent's monster with like a mind control on the side or something, you'd be able to do that. But essentially, you're going to use it with like Absolute Zero or something else you don't quite need at the moment to go for this 3200 beater with 4000 defense. He counts as every single attribute, which is really cool for its ability, which lets you, as a quick effect during either turn, banish him along with all your opponent's face-up monsters that have an attribute in common with it. So that lets you banish Elysium to banish everything your opponent controls, which is really dumb. It just makes it hard for your opponent to fight back, especially after you've whittled them down just a little bit in some cards with your Kaijus, maybe a BLS attack, or, you know, you establish a Mekk-Knight or Dark Law. So this thing is quite nice. It's hard to use sometimes, but if nothing else, it's just a big beater that can punish your opponent's board. Kind of goes, you know, back and forth whether you summon this or Mekk-Knight, because Mekk-Knight is able to protect itself along with the rest of your field, whereas this thing gives itself up in order to protect your field. Because yeah, you could banish one of your invoked monsters in your graveyard, but unless it happens to be the correct attribute, you're not going to get much use out of it. But Elysium overall is pretty good. I was surprised with what it was able to do, despite its difference in summoning mechanics than what I thought initially. But yeah, overall, it's a pretty solid card. I would continue playing it. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of this crazy new deck as much as I did throwing this thing together and playing it for you guys. So we'll start off here with the main deck. We have 3 copies of Aleister the Invoker. Can't wait for the secrets on these. Then we got 3 copies of BLS for the Chaos component. For heroes, we have 1 copy of Honest Neos, 1 Ice Edge, and 2 copies of Shadow Mist, as well as 1 Voltic. So just Shadow Mist is multi-represented, the rest is just one of text. Kaijus, we have Gamma Seal, Radian, and Jizukiru, but this could easily be the Thunder King, and that'd still work as well. For Mekk-Knights, I play 3 Blue Sky and 2 Purple Nightfall, and that's it for monsters. Just a bunch of guys you could throw on the field, infuse, or, you know, put other big guys on the board with. And then we have triple A Hero Lives, triple E Emergency Call, Fusion Gate, Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, double Invocation, and then we got triple Magical Meltdown, double Mask Change, 1 Miracle Fusion as tech, double Pot of Desires, and then triple Terraforming to go and search your key field spells. Then for our extra deck, we have just a few Link 2 monsters. We have the Invoked Link monster, Aleister, the Invoker of Maddness, Mekk-Knight of the Morning Star, and 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗘𝗓. And then we have for fusion monsters 2 copies of Absolute Zero for water, 1 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗃 for dark, 1 Shining for light, and then masked heroes that parallel those attributes. So we have Acid for water, Dark Law for dark, and Koga for light. And then we have some invoked monsters. So we have 𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗧 for water, 𝗪𝗏𝗟𝗑 for fire, just because Ash Blossoms everywhere. Then we got double Mekk-Knight and 1 Invoked Elysium for our invoked cards. That's the end of this video, but there's plenty more where it came from. I invite you to explore the playlists on screen to see what else I have to offer. And if you really liked what you saw today, consider subscribing to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.